Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to Masechtas Zevachim daf Samach Aleph. We are going to begin on Samach Amid Beis, about 7 lines from the bottom. So we were learning when it comes to the Mizbeach, it's necessary that it should be complete. It should not have any pegimos. And if, let's say, the Mizbeach did have a pegam, so that carbon, if you would have done the shchita and the akdar and everything on it, then that carbon is possible. And we also learned a couple of blot ago whether that applies also if it was a near of a nidche, and that's totally on whether or not you say that Bali Chaim are nidchen. Okay. Now, in yesterday's daf, we said that not only is it an issue as far as the Zrikas Adam, but also when it comes to the Achila. So, for example, let's say you have a Bechor, and we're dealing with that you already did everything properly in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. You did the Zrikas Adam, you're makdir, the Imurim, its sacrificial parts, and then, Rahman al-Atzlan, the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, tragically, and now you're left with this meat to eat it. So we said that there's a problem, even though technically you should be able to eat it, because why not, right? It's not something which is any more required or connected to the Mizbech, but we ended up saying that dam ubasar chad milsahi, or we make a hekesh, according to one opinion, that just like the dam needs a Mizbech, so too we say that the achilas basar needs the Mizbech, and therefore pigim would also be a problem. Now, of course, Bechor, and we also then learn from that to Meiser Shein, it's the same din. But Bechor is Kadashim Kalim, because we learned that this is when it comes to Kachi Kadashim, because we learn it all out from the Shiri Mincha, and the pasuk says Ki Kodesh Kadashim He. So it says Beferish, it applies to apparently any Kachi Kadashim, but we say it also applies to Kachim Kal. So with that said, we're going to see if that actually is true. So Kisolik Rabin, Amr Lishmaisa Kamid Rav Yirmiyah. So he said this sugya to Rabbi Yirmiyah, hoping that perhaps he would accept this opinion. So Omer Bavoy Tipshoy, which is usually an interesting insult for some reason. They speak about the Babylonians not in the most favorable way. So Emto Diasri Ba'ara Chashucha Amishmaisa Demachashcha. It's a line which is often said, just because you live in a dark area, so you should also say thoughts which are like without light. You must have heard this, right? It says like this: we know, of course, in the times of the Midbar, the Bnei Israel were constantly traveling around, and now we're going to see, as Rashi says, so that's what he was trying to tell him, that it also applies to Kachim Kalim. So when it came to the Mishkan, now the Mishkan obviously didn't always stay intact because we were traveling numerous places while we were in the desert for 40 years. So we would take down everything, the walls, the Mizbeach, and then we would travel. So what happened during that time when it came to the Karbanos? Because we've been learning that, of course, Kachi Kadashim have to be eaten in the Azara. So how did that work when they were traveling? So the Gemara says like this: at the time when they were traveling in the Midbar, Kachim Nisolim. So the Kachim were possible, says Rashi, Basir Kachi Kadashim. You could not eat the meat. And now, because Salcha Daitoch, Rashi says, in our Havamin is Mipnei Silka Mizbechu, because there was no Mizbech. So as we said, when it comes to Kachi Kadashim, maybe only Kachi Kadashim, it seems pretty specific, it's Kadashim, Kachi Kadashim, you cannot do, right? You're not allowed to eat them. Let's keep going. In the Gemara, but there was some element of Kedusha, because we know a Zav and a Matzayra have to leave certain machnes. There's 3 machnes: Machne Shechina, Machne Leviyah, Machne Yisrael. So we know that the Matzayra had to leave completely away. So says Rashi, so She'en Matzayra Nichnas L'Digli Hashvatim, the Matzah can't even be where the Shvatim are in Machne Yisrael. Vozav Machne Levia, Noisei Aaron. They can't be next to the Machne Levia, but they could be in the Machne Yisrael. They can't. A Zav is expelled from two Machnos, and of course the Matzah is completely Chutz Machne. So now this is a little bit interesting because even though they're traveling, we say that even though they're traveling, it still has some kedusha of oil moyed, that these are considered to be like still three different machnos, even though a machna means you're encamped. So when you're traveling, how does that mean you're encamped? Alma, nonetheless, what do we see? Nifsal de kaimer lamishum de misli b'yaitzehu. Obviously, the whole issue isn't because you're leaving that area, because the oil moyed chashavle. So we're saying that it's considered to be like an oil moyed, that there's a din that it has the kedusha that Zav and Mitzrayim have to leave. Mishtalchin chutz mechitza. So we see that again. There's this dichotomy that it's still considered to be like a machna that they have to leave, but nonetheless they're not allowed to eat kachik kadashim. V'tani idach b'shneim and kaimais kadashim necholim. It says in two places, it says Rashi, Chad bim kaimon b'menachis, ha'amurais behen shamishim bim kaima, v'chad b'chol makom she'yisham derech lichasim b'she'inasu v'kashtan adadi. It says kachim necholin. It says that they could be eaten, right? So can they be eaten or can't they be eaten when there's no mizbeach standing? So my love, ha b'kashim kadashim, ha b'kashim kalim. So this must be one way to rectify, because how else can you understand it? It must be when it comes to kashim kadashim, if there's no mizbeach, even if let's say you did the you were makdir again the damim and everything, but it doesn't matter because we make a hekesh that, or because of shiri mincha, because the chila has to be done with a mizbeach. So there's no mizbeach because it's in transit, so you can't eat the kachim kadashim at that time. However, kachim kalim you can. Okay, so what's the problem? The problem is everything that we just learned up until now, that we said that when it comes to even kachim kalim, like bechor, the din is that you're not allowed to eat it without the mizbeach. So apparently here we see that that's not true. So that's one answer to question 7. Tanya chad b'shas siluk masois kachim nisolim. So in two places, in other words, while they're encamped and also while they're traveling. So how do we answer the stira? So one is, as we just said, kachim kadashim, kachim kalim, but again that becomes problematic for everything we learned. So Omer Rabino, either be the kachim kalim. Really, it's kachim kalim, which means that kachim kalim possibly you're also not allowed to eat, as we said, without a mizbeach. Lukash, as we continue to the short daf, Samach Aleph Amud Aleph, Harbi Shmuel HaRabbanon. Maybe it's totally on this machlok. It says Rashi, Rabbi Shmuel the Yov Basar Medam. So Rabbi Shmuel learns out a comparison Basar and Dam, and therefore, therefore, because of that, you're not allowed to eat even kachim kalim, or it's coming to tell you, like the Rabbanon, that say no. When it comes to kachim kalim, you are allowed to eat. So that's the second answer, basically. So it's either, it's really Samach Amid Beis and Samach Amid Aleph. The second answer is Haba kachim kalim. Brisa dakshiroi hainu basilik karashim mikalayim of a mizbeach mim kaimai. Okay, we didn't complete it yet. Okay. The Iboy saying Mahaba Habikachi Kadashim. Oh, maybe I should read the question. I'm not sure why that's not a good answer. But we have maybe a third answer. Haba Habikachi Kadashim. My Bishnemim Kaimais. What does it mean in two places? It doesn't mean while it's encamped and while you're traveling, because Kachi Kadashim you cannot eat while it is in transit. It means Kaidim Shiamidu Leviim as a Mishkan. It means before the Leviim started basically packing up the Mishkan. However, it was, as we continue on Beis, Liachar Shiyifraku HaLeviim as a Mishkan. And after they've already packed up the Mishkan. Ma'adatema ifsulhu b'yaitze kamash malon. Okay, let's slow down. Let's look at this Rashi. V'yiboy say that Basrei Sanabim Kachik Kadashim, that really both are talking about Kachik Kadashim. So, what does it mean in two places? So, Lav Achar Shenosu. Obviously, it's not after everything's been all packed up and they're traveling, because then you definitely can't eat the Kachik Kadashim. Rather, one of them is talking about Ba'oid HaMishkan Notoi Kimishbatoi, that the Mishkan is still all there. And one's referring to after you already packed up the Karashim, all of the planks and the entire curtains of the entirety of the outside of the courtyard. But the Mizbeach is still there, which is kind of interesting. They would remove all the walls first, and then they would just keep the Mizbeach. Okay. All right. So that's basically the answer over here. What we're saying. So let's look at question 7. Is really we're talking about Havahas b'Kadshe Kadashim, right? Ubraisa Dakshiru. Why is it okay? Hainu b'Sila Krashim v'Kalayim of a Mizbeach b'Kaimai. The Mizbeach is still there, right? The Mizbeach is still in its place. So the whole problem of eating Kachik Kadashim is only when there's no Mizbeach. But if the Mizbeach is still there, even though everything else is is all taken down, then it's still okay. Okay. Samach Alvum Beis. So Madatema Ifsahu B'Yaitze, you would think because there's no walls, so maybe you still can't eat it. Kamashmon, no, it's not a problem, just as long as there's still the Mizbeach is there. So, maybe Taka, that's a good point. Maybe Taka should say that you still can't eat it, because even with the Mizbeach there, but everything was dismantled. Omikra, the Pasuk says, in Bamidbar Beis, V'nasa ol moyed machnil aviyim, that they traveled, b'teicha machanais, kasher yachnu ken yiso. The same way that they encamped is how they traveled. Ish al yodoi l'diglehen, they all had their various flags, as brought down in Parshas Bamidbar. So what do we see from here? V'nasa ol moyed, afal pisha nasa ol moyed hu. So even though they were traveling, or dismantling some of it, it still had the status of an oil moyed. Even though it was Vanasa, it's still an oil moyed. It still has the status of oil moyed. Again, once the Mizbeach is no longer there, that's different. However, as long as the Mizbeach is still in its place, even though everything else is around, it's still considered an oil moyed. Okay. And therefore, that's also the reason why, again, that we require the Zav and the Matzara to still leave their respective machnos, because even though it's true they're traveling, Kasher Yachnu Ken Yisu. So therefore, as they travel, it's still in the same configuration, and therefore they still have to leave those various machnos, respectively. Omer Rav Huna Omer Rav, Mizbeach Shel Shiloi. When it came to the Mizbeach in the time of Shiloh, which is in Shmuel Aleph, with regard to Eli HaKohen and the whole episode over there, and ultimately its destruction, and the corruption over there with Chafni and Pinchas, Shiloh Vanim Haya. So that Mizbeach was actually made out of stones. So what? So the novelty of this piece is that it's coming to tell you that it's not the same Mizbeach in the time of Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu's Mizbeach HaChitzayin was also called Mizbeach HaNechoshes. It was made out of copper. This was made out of stone. And therefore, obviously, it was not the same Mizbeach. This sign, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, Matam Omer, what do we learn out from the multiple times it says the word Avanim? It says Avanim in Shemos Chaf. It says, V'im Mizbach Avanim, Tasili, so it's a mizbeach of stones. It also says, "Avanisa Shem Mizbeach Hashem Lokecha Mizbach Avanim." It says it again in Devarim Chav Zayin, and then Avanim Shleimois Tivna as Mizbach Hashem Lokecha. You should have complete stones to build the mizbeach and you should bring olos, etc. So it's interesting that it keeps saying the word avanim, 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 sholosh pa'amim 3 times. So why is it telling us this? It's telling there's 3 times that the mizbech will be made out of stone. Echad shel Shiloh, one in the day of Shiloh, which is supporting what we're saying now. The echad shel Noi v'Givon. Also, when it came to later on, and Noi v'Givon are linked kind of together. So they're Noi v'Givon, even though they're 2 different places, we usually just link them together. So it's referring to that mizbeach, which is also there. And then the Beis Salamim, also the Beis Hamikdash, was clearly avanim. So, but not the same as the Mizbeach HaChitzoin in the time of Moshe, which was the Mizbeach Necheshes. Okay. So, Masav Ramach Abrahami. So, Eish Shiardim in the Shemayim. There was fire that came forth from the heavens, which is brought down in Seder Oilam. B'mei Moshe, Lunistalka Miel Mizbeach HaNecheshes. It never removed. It was always hitting the Mizbeach HaNecheshes, this great heavenly fire. And the Chiddush was that even though that was the case, nonetheless, we still had to put our own fire there too. El b'mei Shloimoi, it was not removed from the Mizbeach HaNecheshes, El b'mei Shlomo. Only from the time of Shlomo HaMelech. As we're going to see, there was a distinction between the first and the second Beis Hamikdash regarding Eish from the Shemayim. V'yesh Jadim b'mei Shlomo l'Nestalka, and the Eish that came down from Shlomo was not removed on Shabbat Menashe Vitzilka until Menashe came, and unfortunately during that time it was removed, and that was it. Now here's the problem: we're basically saying that the fire was always there on this mizbech all the way through, which is mashma. It sounds like it was always the same mizbech. Now, v'im Isa mikarahu diastalikle. Understand, if in fact we're saying that the mizbech, which was in the times of Shiloh, was not the same as the mizbech in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, now how is it possible that this fire never left? It's a totally different mizbech. It's mashma. It sounds like it was the same mizbech. Otherwise, how do we understand this whole notion of the fire never being removed? So, that's the kasha. So, who do Yomer Rav Nosson? The sound of Nosson Omer Mizbeach Shel Shiloi Shel Necheshes Haya. It's not true. The Mizbeach of Shiloh was not actually made out of stone. It was actually made out of Necheshes, just like in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. So, how can we keep saying the word avanim? So, it's true. Cholul Umoli Avanim. It actually was hollowed out, and the inside of the Mizbeach actually was stone, but it was plated on the outside of copper. So that's what it means. Says Rashi, Mishukam Mishkan b'Shilo. When the Mishkan was set up in Shiloh, Ubanim Mizbeach Avanim, and there were stones, Huska Listalik Mizbeach Shel Necheshes. And obviously it had to be removed from the Mizbeach Necheshes and brought over there. So we're saying, no, he holds like Rav Nosson, as we just said. Okay, so Rav Nachman Yitzchak Aimer, Milo Nestalka, what does it mean that it was not removed? It doesn't mean that it was just always stayed in the exact same place on the same Mizbeach. No, it could mean there was a different Mizbeach, but Nestalka Levatola. Says Rashi, Shedei Batilim and Mizbeach and Necheshes Lagamri. It means it was not completely removed, that it didn't exist. In other words, the fire remained there to some degree. So Mahi Rabbanan, Ari Shechivahu. So what is this? So they say that Shaviva Havi, that there was actually Mishedra. Says Rashi, Kashaya Maktirin al Shelavanim, when they were maktir the carbonais and everything of the Mizbeach of stone, Hayu Zikin V'Havois Yotzis Me'esha Shemayim. There was like these sparks that were shooting out Shel Mizbeach HaNecheshes Shel Moshe, that went from the Mizbeach of Moshe Shavhu Munach Sham, because that Mizbeach, this is an important line, 4 words, that Mizbeach was also there. So there was still the Mizbeach of Moshe Rabbeinu, but it shot also and kind of spilled over onto the other Mizbeach. So therefore, that fire remained, but then it also, some of its sparks landed onto the other one. Of course, this could also be speaking metaphorically in addition to literal, and it's coming to tell you that the same Kedusha in the time of Moshe, that those spiritual sparks also landed onto that Mishkan. Okay. Rav Papa Omer Ushpiza Havi Noket V'Zimnan Hacha V'Zimnan Hacha, that it would move around. Sometimes it was over here and sometimes it was over there. Okay. Tanan Hasam. So we learn over there in Masechtas Midas. It says Ukisha'olu B'nei HaGoyla, that when the B'nei Goyla ascended, Hoisiva Lavdad Amos min Hadaram, V'dad Amos min Hamayrev, Kamin Gama, like an L. So we know that when it came to the first base of Mikdash, the Mizbeach on the Chitzoin was 28 by 28. And basically, that means that the top of the Mizbeach was 20 by 20. Why? Because on both sides there was the Yesod, which accounted for an Am on both sides. And then the next level is the Soivev, an Am on both sides. And then the Kronos, which the crowns or the horns are on the four corners, which is an Amma. And then we had to move also an Amma to allow the Kohanim to be able to walk. So therefore that is 8. So 28 minus 8 is 20. So the base of the first base of Mikdash was 20 amos. So we always have to account for 8 amos, 4 on each side, for the Yesod, Soivev, Kronos, and the Ragli Kohanim. So too when it came to the second base of Mikdash. But what they did was they added a little bit on the west side, which is going toward the Ulam room to the Kodesh Kodashim, and also on the south side, where the ramp is. And they added an extra 4 on each side. So now the Mizbeach, as we know, we hear it is 32 by 32, but that was only the second base of Mikdash. The first base of Mikdash was 20 by 28. Now this one's 32 by 32, which means the base, the top of the Mizbeach was not 20 by 20, it was large. It was 24 by 24, which is interesting. First of all, how were they allowed to do it? And second of all, why did they have to make it bigger? And maybe could they have made it bigger? So that's that detail. So my time is, why did they do this? So Rav Yosef Mishum do sipek, because the fire wasn't large enough. They needed more space to be able to do the avoda. Okay. So I'm going to buy Hashda. Understand 1 second. Mikdash Rishon Nechsibei. It says regarding the first base of Mikdash, Yehuda Yisrael Rabim, that there was so many Yidden, kechoil, just like the sand Asher al Yom, like the sand that's on the seashore. Horoiv. Oichlim, V'shaisim, V'smeichim, and Melachim Aleph. It just says that the first base of Mikdash was just packed. Yeah, we had this tinier 20 by 20 base to burn all the karbanos. So sipek, that was enough, right? So Mikdash Shein in Ksibei, when it came to the second base of Mikdash, when it says in Sefer Ezra, Kol HaKahal, the entire Gans Klal Yisrael's Ke'echad Arba Ribual Payim Shol Shmeos Shishim. So a very, not no one, but a much smaller number, right? So understand, Lo Sipek. How is it possible that wasn't enough? Why would they have to make it bigger when there's less people, right? So Armalei, by the first base of Mikdash, Hasam Eish Min Hashemayim Mesayaton. The great thing was there was this powerful, huge fire that was so efficient that even though there was so many people, it was able to burn what we needed to have burned because of this Eish Min Hashemayim. But by the second base of Mikdash, which we no longer have the Eish Min Hashemayim, Ein Eish Shel Shemayim Mesayaton. And because of that, it was necessary to make it larger because we had even though less people, but just practically it was harder to be able to burn. That's one answer. Kiyasa Rabban Amar Rav Shimon ben Pazi Mishum Bar Kapara Shisin Hoisifu. That actually what they did was they added the extra 4x4 not because of space on the top, because of the shisin. We know that the shisin were originally made on the outside, and then they ended up putting it as like part of the mizbech on the inside. The shisin, which we used for the pouring of the libations, that would go into the shisin, like bara breishis, which says that was bara shisin. Some say that's the very first word. It's brought down Masech Sukkah like that. So what happened? Mikar savar mizbeach adama shehu otom ba'adama. We originally thought it had to be completely filled with earth, which means there could not be any cavities, and therefore it was necessary that the shisim, which was like this hole that went all the way to the height, to the tahayim, to the depths of the earth, had to be on the outside. It was safe sober, but eventually we figured out the shasi kachila, the drinking of the mizbeach, which is the pouring of libations into the shisin, had to be like the achila. My mizbeach adama shu mechuber ba'adama. It's attached to the ground. Shlo yiv nenu lo al gabi kifin. It cannot be built on any holes or cavities. It has to be solid for the achilas mizbeach samach beis aleph. Lo al gabi mechilos. So too when it came to the shtia, and therefore it had to be built. We said, you know what, we're wrong. We actually, the shisim have to be built inside the mizbech. Rabbi said, is this not what we have learned when it says in Sefer Ezra as well? That what does that mean? Shehagiyoi was soif midaisav. That we were able to basically go down to the depths of understanding of the proper way of doing what we were supposed to have done. Ksiv, but the pasuk also says in Divrei Yomim, it's a haksol, which we say very often, hakol bichtav miyad Hashem olai hiskil kol malachis hatavnis. So it's, and this pasuk is quoted so many times, that l'chayra, how did this work? How were we allowed to build and extend the mizbech? It's supposed to always be done in an exact way. You can't just decide, let's make it bigger. Well, you have no right to do. We have to do it according to the dimensions. So if the proper dimensions are 28 by 28, how do we have a right to expand it? So Elam Rav Yosef Krash Kach V'Darsh. Actually, we found a pasuk which substantiated our move of making it larger. The Yermer David Zehu Beis Hashem Elokim Ve'ezem Mizbech L'Oyla L'Yisrael. So we say it's ki bias. So this pasuk that David said, this is the bias, and this is the mizbech. So what is it coming to connect? It's ki bias. It's just like the size of the length of the heichel. Ma bias shishim ama av mizbech shishim ama. Technically speaking, it's telling us that the mizbech achitzayin could have the same dimensions as the bias itself, namely the heichel. And just like we know the heichel was 60 in length, technically maybe the mizbeach also could be 60 in length. So why didn't we make it 60 in length? It wasn't necessary. We didn't need to make it that much bigger. We needed to make it bigger practically either for the shisin, to be able to include that, or so that we would, because in the lacking of having no eish min hashamayim, that we needed a little bit bigger to be able to do what we had to do. Okay. We'll stop there. Let's look at question 8. B'nei hagoyel hasifa shisim b'mizbeach nechasim be'eza tam lo asu koydem achein. Why didn't they do it before? So originally we thought mizbeach adama shu otum ba'adama. It has to be otum. It has to be completely sealed, and therefore you can't have any holes. And therefore the shisim had to be on the outside of it. And then we ended up realizing that mizbeach adama shu mechuber ba'adama. It just means it has to be attached to the ground. It just means that the mizbeach itself can't have any cavities or holes, but it doesn't mean that it has to be completely closed up. It just can't be that there's a bunch of like cavities and holes all around underneath it. Probably, again, for at least for practical purposes, it would collapse, etc. Okay. Question TA 11. So, according to one right? So apparently, you would have to say, possibly, that if you hold that it was a different mizbeach, because it wasn't Mizbeach Necheshes of the time of Moshe, but rather it was a Mizbeach which was made out of, let's just find these words, the Mizbeach Shel Shiloh was made out of Avadim, so therefore, that obviously it must have been a different Mizbeach, okay, possibly. The Chadman de Omer, Lahamid ba, pardon me, Mandi Omer Shel Necheshes, Nistalka Bimei Shlomo. So, again, it seems like in the Havamina, because, but at least that's what we're saying. That otherwise, we say, Bimei Shlomo, let's get this, Bimei Shlomo, so the Eish was there, even all the way until the times of Shlomo Melech. Okay, I'm not really sure. It almost sounds, it says over here, Lamad Yermin Nistalka Lagamri, that it was removed. Okay, so that's not according to the next part of our Gemara. Okay, it's a difficult curveball there. So I also wrote for TB, Zetoim Bimei Eli HaKohen, okay, but Mishkan Shiloh, I don't know why I threw that in there. Yim HaMizbeach Chaisa Shel Necheshes, O Mishel Evan, or Avadim. Umestalik Kol Yom Bimei Shlomo HaMelech, Adkan.